Hey everyone, here's 7 things you should never do to a blaster. I'm that old nerf guy, welcome to that. Seven things you should never do to a blaster. Most of those will be very obvious for the avid hobbyists, but for the newcomers, they might not be. So here we go with the first one, which is never leave your blaster primed. It eventually happened to all of us. You grab a blaster and the second you touch the trigger, it fires because it was primed. What that can do can be dramatic sometimes for weaker blaster or one with weaker spring or just small plastic internal. Because leaving the blaster like that, this is a good example because there is a catch release on it. So leaving the blaster like that means the spring is all compressed. My spring is compressed, the plunger is the catch is engaged on the plunger, meaning there is stress on the catch, on the plunger, on the spring, and on maybe some other part, sometimes even the shell. So leaving your blaster prime will just shrink down your spring, you might lose some performance, you might even break your blaster. So this is a big no, you should never leave your blaster prime. For number 2, on the things to never do to a blaster, it's mostly for the dart, but I think it counts for the blaster too, because if the darts jam into the blaster, you might break something if you force it. It's don't leave your blaster loaded. I know it's almost not true with rival, but still it changed something. It flattens the ball on top and on the bottom of them. For dart, it's the same thing. Dart deform over time in magazine. I mean, loading a lot of magazine for tomorrow's event is a very bad idea. You're going to end up with more than half of your dart squashed down, not sealing right, not shooting properly. This is not a good idea. So leaving your blaster loaded means your blaster will never be ready to fire when you are, because when you're going to prime, it might or might not fire depending if there is air sealed or not behind it, and good chance are not, because as you can see, dart gets flattened, they don't keep their round shape, and that will impair the performance directly. So just don't keep it loaded. For the third thing, I would say don't dry fire your blaster. I know you just saw me dry firing the Viper, but in the best of world, you should never dry fire your high performance blaster. The reason is, if you take a stock blaster like this rival Heracles, you prime it, you shoot, it's not that bad. There is a restrictor at the bottom stopping too much air and blocking this plunger from hitting the plunger tube. Plus, those rivals have some padding. That helps, but the restrictor is what helps the most. Problem is, let's say with this Fire Phoenix, you take it, you dry fire, there is no restrictor. It is just hitting the bottom of the plunger tube, and on a fragile thing like this blaster. And if you put too much hard of a spring inside a fragile blaster like that, you might just even break the shell or break the plunger tube itself or the plunger. Weak blaster, tough spring, dry fire never goes well together. So as an example, this is the weakest you can get, but I'm pretty sure you will break a better blaster if you dry fire it too much. Mostly those blasters with plastic internal, they don't like impact. Therefore, try not to dry fire them. Like I said, in the best of world, you never dry fire your high performance blaster. On number 4 is going to be a little more mod related, and believe me, this is something that will apply to all the blaster out there, or let's say 99%, because I'm pretty sure there is one blaster out there that will not matter if you do it like that. When you're modding and you're painting, please never paint your blaster assembled. I can't stress that enough. Like, never paint your blaster assembled, because as much as you think, as you covered every hole, every crevice, or you plan everything and every surface to receive paint or be protected, paint will get into the internals, the blaster will not function the same way, and your paint will never look as good as if you just took apart the shell, remove the internal, do a good tape job, a slight prep on your part, and then paint it. You should never, ever paint any blaster while it's assembled. That fifth thing you should never do to your blaster is again mud related, and it is maintenance related. You should never clean any part of your blaster, shell or internal, metal or plastic, with strong solvent. I mean, things like acetone, thinner, never go on a plastic blaster, and you don't want to put thinner and acetone on anodized part. You will end up breaking your anodization, losing color on your aluminum part. Those strong solvent, even more for acetone, will basically melt your shell. And if it doesn't melt because, oh yeah, I just put a little on some cloth and I just went over to wipe it, you will micro crack the shell, weakening something somewhere in one corner that you haven't noticed, and maybe it's a structural corner, and generally your blaster will just be damaged. Strong solvent like acetone and thinner with blaster, it's a big no. Stick to isopropyl alcohol, that's gonna be enough. And then that sixth thing you should never do to your blaster. Pretty much obvious for the avid hobbyist, the avid nerfer, but a little less for newcomer because I see of every kind going to events, is holding the blaster by the tip of the stock or by the barrel. And I saw that happen even with aluminum barrel, and I can't understand why you would carry your blaster like that. I mean, I'm gonna show you, but I feel bad showing it. I mean, the guy was carrying the blaster like that. Basically holding this part of the barrel, no scar, but holding this part of the barrel and carrying the blaster like nose down, swinging next to him. I can't understand why you would hold the blaster by your barrel. You would either, if you're lucky, just dislodge the barrel, and that's if you're lucky. Imagine you have my Swift, you can give a curve to the barrel. That would be dramatic. Now, that is very a bad habit. Same goes for the stock, and even more the buffer tube stock. If you go with nerf stock or like a prophecy, I would not do that because the stock is basically holding the spring and there is tension in it. And on the Tomcat, it's a nerf attachment. It's like an Instrike attachment, which is 1.25 inches long. Holding it by the stock will put stress on that joint. There is no joint here, but it's a two-part for this buffer tube stock. The problem with those buffer tube blaster is this plastic is rather thin around it, and carrying it by the tip of the stock, basically by the buffer tube, will break this part, rendering your blaster either useless, or maybe you could put a metal plate and change the shape of the plunger and put a short spring in it. There is possibility, but basically your blaster is broken. That's why you should never carry your blaster by either extremities. The seventh and last thing to never do to a blaster, even more for 3D printing, but if you are into 3D printing, you probably know that, you should never leave any blaster in your car, wherever the place you live in the world. There are some very hot places, I mean, the blaster will just melt if it's into sunlight, or in your car if it gets too hot. And some places that are very cold will either crack your blaster, and with cold and hot and getting in the car and putting the heat and getting out of the car and letting the cold come back in, you got condensation and moisture going everywhere. That's gonna rust the screw of the blaster, that's gonna weaken some of the internal, that's gonna do some horror for your lubrication. You might be in a hurry, you grab the blaster, you go inside. Whenever it's winter or summer, it's going to be cold or hot. Either you didn't warm it or didn't cool it down before using it, something will fail. For cool, it's going to be breaking the plastic. If you prime it while it's cool, while it's too cold, like freezing, you're going to break something in your blaster right away. If it's too hot, you might break a whole ring. If it's really too hot, man, you're going to see it, it's going to melt. But you should never, ever leave a blaster in your car, wherever you live in the world. Some of them were more obvious than others, but those were my 7 things not to do to a blaster. Yeah, that's it for this video. In the meantime, you can always follow me on Facebook and Instagram at @thatlittlenerfguy. Please leave a like and comment, subscribe for more content. Don't forget to hit that bell to notify for my latest video. This was Dave Fatag. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.